Hey, Shalom, Doooovid here. My very first time in studio live with a guest, my good friend Dishan Marquel, who I've known for close to a decade now. We've been working on multiple things here in Metro Detroit for years, and a lot of the stuff on my in real life. He's a common guest on my YouTube event for a lot of the events I record, and our paths cross, working together constantly. We talk on the phone pretty often about politics. Dishan Marquil has a bachelor's degree in political science, and he's finishing up his degree in the next year or so in broadcast journalism. He's been active on all sorts of activism, different fields in Detroit. As the program goes on, he'll talk more about himself. But we thought we'd talk about elections 2020. Can Detroit go red? And maybe he'll start by talking about his experience in the 2016 elections. So please.
Thanks for having me. Yes, I fashion myself as a moderate politically. I've had a passion for politics since I was very young, and having directly participated in the 2016 elections, I've witnessed a lot of flaws that happened to the defeat of the other party, so to speak. So I've basically repositioned my thought process, and I'm also following current political trends. It was a shock to all of us that within the city limits of Detroit, Michigan, that it was a substantial amount of Republican voters at the time. Like, the numbers indicate that there were.
Let's start back in 2016, because we met over 10 years ago. I was always right-leaning, but in Detroit, voting for the Republicans is, basically a wasted vote, because no Republican could ever win in Detroit. Certainly local elections, Congress people, mayor, a lot of times the Republican seat no one even runs for that. On the big elections like senator and president, people in Detroit could vote for a Republican for senator or for president. So, Obama 2008, 2012, obviously Detroit being a largely African-American city, there was resounding support for President Obama, although there was, some support for, Mitt Romney and from people in Detroit. But however, 2016 with the rise of Trump, and I've always, conservative values. So, I came to Detroit, we became friendly, and hopefully I have some credit for pushing Dishan to the right a little bit. But 2016, I believe you worked for the Hillary Clinton campaign a little bit. If you want to talk about that, even though you had a natural inclination to like President Trump, but there was probably no resource for you to actually work for President Trump, and you got, and that was the pressure of everyone around you who was active in politics to work for Clinton.
Well, yeah, exactly. The social contracts at the time that we thought were in place kind of deceived us, in the sense that later on, my best interest was not in the mind of those that was organizing the campaign and trying to promote that particular agenda. But what was remarkable was when President Trump came to Detroit to campaign, like for the first time at that Baptist church, which is a mega church in the city. People thought it was a joke. But later on down the line, fast forward a little bit, that was the thing that tipped the election. Like, the numbers indicate that there were close to 30,000 people that voted for the Trump campaign the first time around. And as far as political indicators, and me, I have a lot of the basic tenets of politics down pat, having a BA in political science from a pretty reputable school, Wayne State University. Like, the indicators are saying that support for Trump and conservative values is growing exponentially. I predict that you might have 120% increase. So the first time around was 30,000 plus people. Others would deny it, but the truth of the matter was Detroit was the vote that tipped the election. this time around, like Candace Owens indicated, and she's right. Like when she said Trump may win by a landslide, I'm foreseeing that at least 120,000 people within the city of Detroit just may go that way.
Yeah, I remember. I mean, Trump won by tens, like I think less than 20,000 votes in 2016. And there were different factors. Obviously, Trump had a pretty active campaign. He was all over the state the night of elections. He was in Grand Rapids. But you could look at it as the African American Republican vote was one of the factors that put Trump over. And, coming in 2020 for, Trump to win Michigan, a critical factor will be the African American Republicans. And, so I don't know if you want to talk about your personal experience in working for the Clinton campaign, if it's just like as a student in political science, you wanted to be active. So that's just what people were doing and how that got involved versus, the pressure for you to be on the left, even though maybe your inclination was to support Trump. And then maybe we can move on to how that's going to play out for the coming elections.
Well, now at this present time, with the rise of Candace Owens, who's very remarkable in the way that she represents her causes and the passion that she has, people are unafraid to say, yeah, I think that I am conservative. That the factors in the city of Detroit, like the falling apart of the city, the current policies for African Americans under a Democratic regime just seem to be not working. And a lot of people is disenchanted with the system itself. And so there are a large percentage of people that is willing to try something new. Really, they have social conservative values.
I mean, the erosion of values. I mean, God forbid, like the promotion of homosexuality. And, me and you have run-ins with that in Detroit constantly where, basically you're forced to promote homosexuality. And, so being a conservative is the only way to push back. And it's almost scary just to even mention that on YouTube. We might lose our YouTube page just for mentioning that. But there's a lot of different factors. And I think Trump personally is a personality that he's had good rapport with the larger Americans, probably the hip hop community, different African American entrepreneurials. Generally, I think African Americans are more entrepreneurial than even possibly other communities.
Well, just to mention one important point, there are two very prominent artists in the music and entertainment world that are Trump supporters. The unlikely candidates are Ice Cube and Shaquille O'Neal publicly support Donald Trump. So that's what I'm trying to emphasize. There is a changing of the guard, and like within the Democratic Party and they umbrella of values, like it's a very controversial point. A lot of people feel that President Obama didn't do anything for the African American community at large. And that's a controversial point because, again, like within the blanket statements and the broad big tent ideal, people always try to reprimand people for opposing the facts. Like fantasy and reality is two different things. So basically, we're here to bring people up to speed. Like, I technically can't say what will or won't happen, but I see pretty strong indicators leaning in that direction. And another thing that I wanted to talk about is like, okay, you look at the unskilled job market in the city of Detroit. You got a lot of unskilled jobs like in the service industry and other like manual labor jobs. But the whole concept of conservatism in the African American community is about independence. If a guy has a job making $10 or $12 an hour and has a significant amount of hours, on a bi-weekly pay schedule, then at the end of that pay period, he has some money to assume access and respect in the society. Like he's able to purchase, he's able to participate. And dignity is very important, where on the other side of the fence, like social programming, like food stamps and other forms of programming that put a negative stigma on poverty, kind of rob people of their respect. And so, in my opinion, I think these are conflict issues because, when people have low self-esteem and no vision of the future, how they can participate and that it will be better, then the whole environment suffers in the community at large. That's why you see a lot of the crime statistics and other things going on because of the lack of respect and dignity to the common person who, if given the opportunity, and I'm not even talking about skilled labor or college educated people like myself, I'm just saying from a basic tenet of, unskilled labor, just having a reliable job to be able to be a productive citizen and have a measure of respect in society.
Yeah, and hopefully we're going to try to turn this into maybe a weekly show. And he's getting his degree in broadcast journalism, and he's on the radio here in different programs in Detroit, and was active in different media fields for years. But we wanted to keep this episode more about the larger, because a lot of my audience on YouTube is across the nation, about 2020 elections, battleground Detroit, battleground Michigan, and possibly Doooovid's I'm the alt-right Jew, compared to the majority of my Jewish brethren with left-leaning views. I'm right wing, and Dishan here, certainly the majority pressure would be to be on the left wing, and that might be changing. I mean, when it was President Obama you were mentioning, that was a harder call versus Clinton. So with the African American community, whether they're going to back President Obama versus Clinton, the support for Clinton was much less. And maybe we'll get into the actual elections coming up, because the next Democratic primaries are going to be here in Detroit in 3 weeks, and that's part of the reason I'm doing this now, is to help grow my channel so I could hit 1,000 subscribers and be able to live stream interviews. And I might even be able to get in Jake Turks, the Hasidic journalist, might come, and maybe he'll be able to get me in, or I'll be outside doing interviews. But all the 20 some candidates there, it's a tough call to say, are you really going to fall in behind in the Jewish community, the Detroit community, all these different Democratic communities? It's a tough call. Who do they want to fall in behind?
But one important point is that, like Candace Owens mentioned, like as a political analyst myself, if Donald Trump brings Candace Owens to Detroit, Michigan, like she said, there will be a political landslide because she's a charismatic person who can bring those people who are on the fence over to the other side. And that's something that people like the Democrats are trying to downplay just from a political level. Like they continue to try to act like as if she's not a force of nature. But I'm here to tell you the different side of the story because I'm on the ground every day. I know what I see in the streets, and I know how Detroit functions. I've been here majority of all of my life, and it's just exciting to see, like with the growth of the city, the national media is promoting Detroit in a certain light, but these are the components of why this is working, why the resurgence is here. People is willing to be open-minded and say, well, the latter things didn't work, let's try something new. And this has transpired on all the levels of government, from the local elections up to the national level. Like even with our local mayor, like our current mayor is a moderate Democrat who's able to merge both sides, the business community, which is largely conservative, with the development of downtown and midtown. And that's an important component from a political perspective, because even though you're not 100% in alignment, you able to merge on fiscal issues and be nonpartisan in the process. And that's a key component. Like even here tonight, I'm not in agreement with everything that's being said, but I'm here to offer an honest perspective. And yes, I truly believe that if Candace Owens comes here and campaigns, that it's going to be a turning point in the election. That's just my personal observation.
Yeah, and it's going to take a lot more than Candace Owens. She might help him. In 2016, Omarosa was here in Metro Detroit, and I think Olivia King, Dr. Martin Luther King's niece, came at that event, and even the bar next to the synagogue that we go to sometimes. I promoted in the past on my YouTube page. I remember Omarosa, DeMongo's bar and jazz club where she came, and the owner tweeted that, and yeah, but the election is going to take more than one personality, and Detroit will definitely be one of maybe 10 or so top major battleground urban areas. And I predict, I predict Candace Owens probably will come here, and she might introduce President Trump. But I also predict that there'll be new figures. I mean, possibly even someone like you rising on the scene that will be, speaking and introducing these candidates, and might open the door for not just having like, God forbid, like one or two tokens, so to say, but a whole mass of hundreds of thousands of African-American conservatives.
Well, yeah, see, she's a general because early on she took off and started marching and preaching her agenda. And see, Donald Trump already planted the seeds of a turnaround in Detroit when he came here the first time. I was watching and monitoring that situation, and I kind of saw the indicators at the time that, wow, like just for him to come here and get out successfully the first time, like he had major backing from Bishop T. Jackson in the city. So at that point, I knew something was going on. But this time, like Donald Trump's presence in the city is mainstream. It's nothing that the opposing side can do to stop whatever they want to do. And that's just a political fact. You have to be realistic because like Michigan, by and large, outside of Detroit, is pretty Republican, like in other cities like Grand Rapids and other little lesser towns. So Detroit has always been the battleground because it holds the largest populace, but a divided house can't necessarily stand it. And it's a lot of people that's not willing to go along with the typical, umbrella politics of just saying anything Democrat, it's okay when they're not directly benefiting from it. Like people don't want to go back to the humiliation, the non-participation, the empty promises. And this gets us back to the Obama era because I like to call it the Great Deception. People were under a lot of illusions, including myself. But at the same token, I have since reworked and refocused my ideals on a political level. And even guys like me, there's a strong chance that I might just vote for Donald Trump this time around because there's nothing on the other side that's even remotely interesting to the fact that would allow me to keep that position of being involved with that perspective.
Yeah, obviously me and Dishan have countless disagreements. We're not monolithic on any of these opinions. We're just friends, and we talk politics and work together, and you want to help build each other's streaming career and affect positive change in the city. We hope we have an active, lively chat because obviously he's talking in front of my audience. I mean, he's actually better with media. I mean, his background is broadcast journalism. He's worked in entertainment before when the whole acting thing was getting big here in Detroit. He was even, were you background, what are they called, for some movies?
Yeah, I've actually went to film school for a while, like as a camera operator, but I've also been in the front of the camera as well. So I've kind of did both things.
You could find him in a few mainstream movies as an extra. Which movies were you an extra in?
It's not really important. If people really want to know, they can Google it. But at the same token, I will say that, part participation and ambition is definitely a part of my modus operandi, and I consider myself to be a person of the times. Like, I don't want to live in the past. I don't want to rest on my laurels. Like, politically, I want to be able to be a participator and assess things in a correct manner and fair way.
Yes, and due to our perspective, we're both, I guess, alternative media. That's why we're here. That's why we're promoting our own stuff, helping each other promote our media, is because we have alternative views that are not expressed in the mainstream. Both of us have faced extreme pushback from the mainstream community who do not want our voices being heard. And that's why we're coming to you and creating this venue. And hopefully, we have an active chat here. People who follow Doooovid for a while, I'm on different, alt-right streams, conspiracy, different forms of alternative media. And, so if Dishan's willing to, we'll have a lively conversation, and we'll ask some of the questions from the chat that
Sure.
typically don't get asked. So
I like one point that you made. You said there are forces out there who do not want our voice to be heard. And I'm a pretty mainstream guy. Like, I'm a facts and figure individual. You have to show me conclusive proof to sustain your perspective. But at the same token, I'm not indignant to the facts and figures in front of me. And that's what makes the difference, because, certain people, like, for better words, on the Democratic side of the fence, are indignant to the reality. Like, the thing that I really don't like that I see is the pettiness of the media and how they try to, exploit and outrageously over exaggerate any little thing that the current president does. Like, granted, you have a right to like or don't like who you.
let me read some of the chat here to make it more interactive. So we got Hypatia, Democratic Party leadership is a way to the right to their voter base. Trump offers economic populism. If you have a direct question, do it at Doooovid, so I'll see it. So if you asked a question before, ask it again. And I got some haters in the chat. Got it.
Answer the one from the guy that's Muslim, because I want to make a fact.
Did I miss that?
It's somebody, go back up. He said that he was the only Muslim here, but you know what? That doesn't matter anyway, because where I stay at in Detroit, like, I'm less than a mile away from Dearborn, and the reality on the ground in Dearborn, Michigan, is that you have a lot of sophisticated, educated, and professional people. Like, it's a very wealthy community, like a lot of merchants. So definitely don't believe the hype when it comes to Dearborn. And like,
Nation of Islam. I mean, Nation of Islam is currently based in Chicago, but it actually
no,
started,
not them guys. It was one guy,
but
who
it
was
started
up
in
here.
Detroit.
Well, yeah, that's a different conversation. Like, I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying the one individual that said, well, I'm the only Muslim over here. But as an American and living in America, that doesn't matter, because you have every right as everybody else to participate in the civil discourse. And I am a constitutionalist. I believe in the fundamental facts that make this country what it is. So, like, regardless of what your race, gender, culture, or political perspective is, you have a right to be heard. So I just want to put that out there, because you know what? That shows a lack of intelligence and sophistication when you get into the, like, stereotypes. We don't deal in stereotypes. We deal in archetypes. Like,
I agree. Let me get caught up with the chat. And like, I do hope to reach out to more people in Detroit. Maybe even we'll have Rashida Tlaib on, or different Palestinians, and take advantage of reaching out and putting some of the voices. And also among the right-wing Trump supporters, there was quite a voice of Trump support within the Arab and Muslim community.
Exactly. And that's another voice.
Let me just read some of these to get caught up with the chat. This guy's Simic, I'll just read a few of his comments and you can respond at the end. Blacks are addicted to Gibbs from the welfare system until the changes. Then you might convince a few percentage blacks using Candace Owens, but the rest will want to keep the Gibbs coming. So let me just catch up with the chat. There's quite a few, and this guy's got a few more similar comments. Mustaphalis, he's been following me for a year now. Sometimes clips these. Why do blacks vote on race 95% of the time. So I'm going to let you address these. Let me just get caught up. I'm sorry. I'm using my computer camera, so yeah, I have to sit far away to get us both on. I do plan on investing more money into better equipment. So right now I'm just making the best with the current equipment I have, and there's. I find the Jews the most polite and civilized people I've ever talked with. I do not fear death because life is a test. I watch for this knowledge. I found this channel. Um, Someone accusing me of being a terrorist. I'm not sure. Maybe is got it the Muslim. I understand what you were trying to tell me, but why does my heart love everybody? I cannot hate. I want peace for each one of you. Okay, another person accusing me of negative things.
Well, you know what? To answer the guy's question about blacks voting on race, that is
and Gibbs, as he called it.
Yeah, Gibbs. That is a phenomenon that developed after, like, for better examples, the FDR and LBJ politics, because historically African Americans were Republicans. The party of abolitionism with Frederick Douglass himself was a Republican. And by and large, early on in America's history, like, the prominent people were Republicans. Dr. Martin Luther King was a Republican, and a whole bunch more prominent people. But the turnaround came, it's a lot of theories and layers to the complexity of why African Americans became Democrats. And I'm just giving you a quick synopsis, but that's not historically the case. That's how the racial baiting came into play.
Yeah, Divine Nine is saying the Republicans were mockingly called the Negro Party by the early Democrats. And maybe we take a quick divergence to address, because, like, unfortunately, I get a lot of trolls. And, like I mentioned, like, I'm pro-gun. Detroit's a very pro-gun city, and that's also one of the leaning things that turns African Americans towards the Republican Party, because generally in Detroit, people like their guns. So the talk of gun control is not popular here in Detroit. Chief Police Craig has openly told Detroiters that one of the best solutions for crime is to buy guns, because obviously police protection. So, I get a lot of trolls, and sometimes I'll make comments like, God forbid, I do believe in self-defense. I encourage people to own guns. I'm not looking for conflict, but if conflict comes, I will defend myself. I'll encourage other people to defend themselves. And, God forbid, that could include lethal force with a gun. And if you want to briefly talk about the popularity of guns in Detroit.
Well, yeah, that goes back to prior to the turnaround in the African American community, when African Americans became Democrats. African Americans, by and large, are very socially conservative, and a lot of people, like in cities like Detroit, come from the South, and gun ownership was just a part of everyday life. People hunt, other purposes, a lot of sport, but people were always encouraged to protect their plot of land. So definitely it just grew in the culture. Like, what you hear about is like the criminality in guns. Like, when the good guys got guns, it's not a problem, but it's only the bad guys that you hear about. And bad guys usually don't pick on good guys with guns. See, that's the problem. Like in places like Texas, in certain areas, like, you have the same social problems as you have everywhere else, but to a whole lot lesser degree. And that's an important highlight that people got to understand, because if you look at other examples throughout history in the world, like, dictatorial regimes always try to demilitarize and unarm the populace before they commit crimes of genocide and other totalitarian acts. So you got to keep that in mind. Like, each citizen has a right, according to the Constitution, to bear arms and form a militia in the event of a tyrannical government. And that's what, in my opinion, extreme socialism becomes is that it's tyrannical in nature because people try to think for the individual. They don't have free thought. Access to information is limited. And then it just goes into everything else like martial law. That's a byproduct of extreme socialism. So I just want to put that out there. Like as a political scientist who's constantly in research, I'm giving you the short versions in a lot of our discourse today. But at the same token, do your own research. Only thing we doing is raising the topic, but we encourage you to find the facts on your own and come to your own conclusions.
And this might be, part of the reason why, we would never be platformed in a mainstream source is because, certainly within the Jewish community, gun control is extremely popular, although there's an element of very pro-defense, and the African American community is actually much more gun-friendly than the Jewish community, but the mainstream voices would not platform someone who had those pro-Second Amendment voices. And I'm not advocating anything illegal. Protecting the weak, not in any way committing crimes or picking on people. But I do fully advocate Second Amendment rights, self-defense. Michigan is, in fact, a stand-your-ground state, that a person does have a right to use a weapon with deadly force in order to defend themselves. And in Metro Detroit, there's probably a story like on average once a week or maybe more of, God forbid, someone, breaking someone's house and getting killed by a homeowner, what they call here a great American, is synonymous with a gun owner that took their self-defense into their own hands, and is saying that's actual policy from the police department in Detroit is I recommend people take their self-defense in their own hand, but that's why we would be alternative. But there is this rising voice of people that are being tired of being told what to do, being tired of saying that they can't have their guns. And, maybe we'll talk more about, kind of the red-blue state division and racial politics, where it could also be from the minority community or the Jewish community or African-American community, that they could look at possibly a rising tide of sentiment of isolationism or nativism, where it's saying actually having large amounts of armed people
could I just jump in for a second?
It's one of the best fences to the greater community, is the fear that people have that there's millions of these people that own guns and are willing to defend ourselves.
I'm of the thought that like race is just a smoke screen. It's deeper issues that why you see disparity out here, like economic disparity, in people become racialized in their thinking only because of economic disparity. And that's a whole nother concept where the system of reward and punishment is totally unequal. But at the same token, it's not the fact that I'm an African American. The greatness comes in because I'm able to rise to the standard through merit. Like, you hear of the great accomplishments of certain African Americans, and a friend of mine who's a very, very prominent journalist said, it's not the fact that I'm African American. I'm a journalist first who happens to be African American. And so like that goes across the board, like as far as your scientists, doctors, lawyers, philosophers, builders. I don't think race really is that big of a barrier. And see, that was a trick that was socially engineered into the community by forces like the extreme left, who made everything out to be a race problem when in reality it isn't, because they wanted to control.
Let's hit some tough questions. So Mistopheles is a hard right alt-righter, and so why is the God forbid the black murder rate 5 times that of white? The FBI statistics, and God forbid there's pretty clear disparity. Detroit is the murder capital of America many years, about 400 murders. I believe the majority of those go unsolved, and the majority of those are black on black crime.
Well, number one, the numbers are higher is because it's less black people. It's more white people actually in America than black people, but black people just happen to live in concentrated areas. And then a lot of the problems stem from stuff like drugs, which is a direct culprit in a lot of this. Like I've been in Detroit all of my life. I have never been worried about being murdered. But once you get into certain arenas, your chances of being murdered goes up exponentially. So yeah, stay away from drugs, and the using distribution of hard drugs usually leads to a bad outcome. So usually that's what people miss in the whole equation. You know, it's just not any random person, but it's a certain group within the community that where this risk is very much a real thing.
So Tom Anderson's probably a numbers guy, and he's saying per capita. So I mean, he just means that, statistically, obviously there's a lot more murders committed by, the general, so to say, white community, but per capita, there's a lot more murders within the Black community. If you think there's a propensity, um, and I mean, a lot of people who watch this, human biodiversity or racial determinism, and I'm constantly arguing. Generally, I'm a believer in the soul, and that people have extensive amounts of free will and can control our own destiny through the power of the soul and God. Although most of the people I debate with are more believers in racial determinism. So for those voices out there that believe in old school genetic racial determinism, do you have any comments on what they would believe that, God forbid, African Americans have a more propensity towards violence and crime?
Well, to me, those are just niche issues. Like people's worldview usually comes about from a particular, like, acculturation to education. But it's one question I want to answer really quickly. Like somebody made a comment trying to refer to Africa. Is Africa's poverty a smokescreen? But I want to tell that person that, I've studied with one of the most prolific African scholars in the world who wrote 48 books on the subject. And, I would say to you, don't mix apples and oranges, because at the bottom line of any major catastrophe is the economic agenda. So please do your research. Like, you are not going to play up, surface issues unless you want to get to the real issues. So that's what I got to say about that. Like, Africa is what it is because of a lot of factors that is way too complex and complicated to discuss at this particular time. And, your level of information is minuscule.
Is there anything you've seen in the chat or related to what we've been talking about that you wanted to address directly?
Oh, what'd you say? Could you repeat that question, please?
Yeah, I don't know if you could, see the computer's like 3 feet away from us, but if you've seen anything going in the chat or comments or
Okay,
related to what
Jewel
we've been
Citizen,
talking
48
about.
books on what subject? Well, subjects like the history.
You're talking about Dr. Ben?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, one of the most prolific scholars to live. He recently passed like 3 years ago.
When we became friends initially, if you want to pull that book off of the shelf, is that so when we first became friends, and we met at the downtown synagogue, and maybe we'll talk more about internal Jewish politics also. And he mentioned he knew Dr. Ben Jalkin, and I told him I had this book, and that was one of the big reasons we became friendly right away, because one thing, I wanted to know someone who had actually studied under Dr. Ben.
Turn it around for this.
Yeah, and he was happy to meet someone who had some of his literature, was familiar with his teachings.
Yeah, I actually traveled with him and studied up under him. It was just one of the most exhilarating times of my life, because this is straight from the horse's mouth. Like, Africa's history goes back millions of years, and that's a whole nother topic.
Would you believe? I mean, you don't believe that race is a social construct. Obviously, it's not just that we look different, have different complexions or style to our, but there are proclivities towards characters based on race. Or you think?
Yeah, Jim Johnson, hold that comment. Go back to that. He asked me what my European mixture is.
Okay, well, and this one here, Mustafli said, "Do you believe race is a social construct?" And then you go on to,
it is a social construct.
So you don't think that there's somewhat of a genetic determinism, at least to some level, based on,
very minutely, because
not just white, black, but Chinese, Indian.
Let me explain like this. As long as human beings have existed, they have been exchanging genes. The ultimate question becomes, we all eat from the soil. So if a person say that they're not interacting with another person or a group, they got to be kidding themselves, because like we come from an agrarian background, all of humanity, and the like genetic evolution of one person or a group going from one area to another is just like evolutionary albinism is more of an appropriate term. As far as the lightening of the skin, like 100 years ago, some of my relatives were 100% European, and that's a whole nother question. But to answer Jim Johnson's question, my Euro mixture is Irish. I have Irish blood as well as African blood, obvious. So I just wanted to answer that question.
And what about the Jews? Do you think the Jews are also a social construct?
Well, that's a little bit more complicated. On the surface level, yes, because Judaism, as it's known, comes from the African mystery schools or the Middle Eastern, Near Eastern mystery schools, like in Babylon, Syria, the Syrian culture, the Canaanite culture, like this whole thing that people get into, like, monotheistic constructs. They don't even know the history of monotheism. Like organized religion as it is today is a very recent phenomenon. So like I would encourage all people to, do more research, because you might just become enlightened.
So you've been following me on social media. I said, like, in real life, Dishan's like the only one. I have one other friend, Yosef, who's more introverted, but the only two people that I know in real life that seem to follow me and watch my stuff and talk about it. So you've seen a lot of my debates with leading alt-right figures, and you're also involved in Jewish community and Jewish politics. Do you have anything you would add on the very tough questions about Judaism and the role that we play in society that you would have possibly answered different than I've answered in my numerous debates that over the last year?
Well, like with all things, like the original Judaism itself was more of an agrarian spiritualism. People don't understand that the whole concept of spirituality comes from agrarian culture. Like if you can't feed yourself, then you can't be spiritual. And like a lot of the ethical precepts come from mercantile society. Like, say for instance, if you have a bunch of goods that you trying to move from point A to point B, and say for instance, at the earlier stages of mankind, there would be vegetables and produce. If you say Amabula Luta Kuta was the reason that shipment of goods got from one place to the next place, then that will be it. And every other group of culture had their same version of that. So that's how spirituality came to be. These symbolic, characterizations of like cohesive times and places and energies became to be associated with modern religion. Like I try to stay away from religion because, religion is something for the unenlightened, you know what I'm saying? But spirituality is something totally different, like I don't get into religion.
Have you read these books? Someone's asking me, like, I own all 3 volumes. I think that's all they have now of the Nation of Islam, Secret Relations Between Blacks and Jews. Have you read these books?
I've read everything basically, but like through my filterization, I've come to the facts and figures. That's why I say thank God for Dr. Ben, because he clarified early on about the numerical data. That's the most accurate form of fact finding that you could do, because people distort events and times, but you can't lie about numbers. You could play a lot of games and do a lot of other stuff, but numbers tend to be pretty solid. So, therefore, like I stick to events that's based on numerical data.
So what about unemployment? Hypatia, what would you say are the biggest reasons why unemployed people in Detroit don't move and get work somewhere else, or general comments about the unemployment problem in Metro Detroit.
Well, yeah, it's just like a resource. Like in order to actually have a move, make a move, you must have a certain amount of like resource to even make that next step. And unfortunately, a lot of people suffer through financial illiteracy. Like they don't plan to save anything that they have, and therefore they become stuck. So they at the mercy of whatever political whim is popular at the time.
Well, I definitely support education and believe that intelligence is generally a soul function, that everybody has the potential to, somewhat pray and become smarter. But obviously that's not universally accepted. And among the people I debate, so a lot of them have some sort of racial genetic determinism. And, so on the alt-right, the leading figures will commonly mention IQ differences and possibly the waste of money trying to attempt education on everybody, or even to racial disparities that say, can you, does it pay to try to put everyone in university? Are they going to be able to benefit from a university degree? Or like the No Child Left Behind policies where we spend, over $10,000 per child trying to educate them with largely would be considered a Western education. Do you think that's a wise policy? Or do you think that a push to possibly different approaches towards?
Well, in theory, is great policy, but in practical application, it's disastrous. A lot of stuff is based on like group dynamics and cultural education. Like one individual said, "Well, poor Jews save a lot because it's culturally reinforced." Like without a culture to rely on and have a vision and some type of hope for the future, a person really doesn't stand a chance. That's why it's very controversial. Like when people start the conversation about the greatness of Africa, it becomes very politicized, very polarized quickly. But still yet, I make no excuses because I'm one of these type of guys who did pull myself up by my bootstraps. Like I don't owe any college debt. I didn't beg. I worked hard. I spent my own money and I arrived at my destination. So, yeah, it's a little bit harder for others, but at the same token, it's not impossible.
So that's some questions from the chat. This guy, J.M. Ritticelli, relationships. The Rothschilds, the founder of Israel, financed the greatest crime in human history, the scramble for Africa. Still going on today. Maybe like the diamond mines. Obviously, De Beers in South Africa was largely invested from Oppenheim Rothschild family. A lot of the resource extraction of colonialization was financed partially by Jewish bankers.
But see, let me get into that. Hold that thought, because let me explain something very clearly.
I'm going to get to your Tom Anderson wants to hear your opinions on reparations for slavery also.
Yeah, I'm about to talk about the whole wealth distribution in Africa. Like, as a black man who's highly entrenched in African culture and philosophy, like it's the Africans themselves that taught the Europeans everything they know. Like one case in point is that the Medici family, the first biracial person in power was Alessandro de Medici. So the Rothschilds themselves wasn't even an ideal at the time. And the richest person in the history of world civilization is this man, Mansa Musa, who was based out of Mali. A friend of mine, Mohammed Samare, is a direct descendant. Like he owned and controlled 90% of the international gold trade in Africa. So in today's numbers, that would be about $900 trillion.
Well, just to push back, that was when you had actual physical resources where that his wealth was largely in actual gold or material resources, and Africa was mineral rich in diamonds, King Solomon's mines and stuff like that. Right. But in terms when banking and the arisal of paper money, fiat currency, that largely Africans have fallen behind. So you say like the Rothschilds, maybe the resources were dominated, came from Africans. However, the domination of the fiat currency, is largely been Jews and mostly Jews with European extraction.
Like
today,
back to what we discussed earlier, the mercantile system of spiritualism is what gave birth. Like in African terminology, the word Hebrew is spelled Haribu, Haribu, which it has a Zulu implication, but the word Hebrew just means whoever's from across the water on the other side of the lake. It could be the Sea of Reeds, it could be, the Tigris Euphrates, it could be the Galilee, like the caravan routes were all mapped out from different parts.
We might have to save this for a different discussion, because this is actually an area, because he studied under Dr. Ben, who was one of the biggest experts in Pan-Africanism and different things. But let's keep this to American politics, and maybe we'll have a special stream where we'll talk about this. So Jam Shelley, save those questions for a different time, and let's keep this focused on American politics. If you want to go back to the question about reparations.
You know what? And this is going to sound like kind of sharp edge, but number one, there's been too much time that has lapsed in between the original act of transnational slavery. It went on for 400 years. So no, I'm not a proponent of reparations, because how do you correctly assess the damages? Like people just think about the physical labor aspect of slavery, but they don't understand the brain drain. The debt is just so much to the point where nobody can pay it back. You will have to literally strip all the patents that basically hold this country together. Like, for instance, you couldn't drive your car down the street anymore because you wouldn't have traffic lights, because that is one of the most basic fundamental Black inventions that came to be. And see, it borderlines silliness, because the geopolitical situation at any given time is always full of trade-offs. Like, you had all people, Black, white, Asian, Middle Eastern, everybody participated in the atrocities. So therefore, we are all equally to blame.
What about Hypatia here asking about cryptocurrencies in Detroit? We definitely have at least one mutual friend, that actually a person who's trying to convert to Judaism, who's heavily involved in cryptocurrencies. I don't know if he's actually making money off of it, just teaching people. Certainly there's quite a bit of cryptocurrency in Detroit, and I'm not sure how much of the native Detroiters are using cryptocurrency versus the new people coming to Detroit. But if you want to
hold the Brazilian question, I'm gonna answer that, because I did study most recently about Brazil.
Okay. Did you have anything you wanted to speak to about cryptocurrency?
Well, like any other thing, it's the new thing. It's the next form of fiat currency, because the credit system is evolving. But people don't understand cryptocurrency is really about banking, internal transfers within banks to prevent fraud. Like, the average citizen, I don't think is really going to be a big recipient or beneficiary of cryptocurrency.
I have a lot of people who watch my material and different things, like pagans or people who are not big fans of Christianity. I mean, they don't want to be Jewish, and some of them think that Christianity is kind of like a conspiracy perpetrated by Jews. But a lot of them have a deeper understanding of nativism and tribal type things from a European perspective. So if you want to, I'm not sure if you want to take the direction to more talking about Pan-Africanism or pre-Christian or even non-Christian ways of life, like the questions about Africa.
It's about education.
Or if you want to address the one in Brazil, you're more than welcome.
Well, yeah, I can answer a few quick questions. Like, Pan-Africanism is based on African education and cultural precepts. And a person can't say that they are practicing Pan-Africanism if they have a negative discourse towards the greater society, because Pan-Africanism in its purest form is totally contrary to obstruction in any way, fashion, or form. When you have your own behavior in check, that is the purest form of democracy. And so basically that's why I want to leave that, because that's according to J.A. Rogers,
Yeah, I wanted to ask you in a more general related to 2020 elections, but it just put straight out Mustaphalis, want to thank God, even though he's extremely tough questions on the Jewish religion and Jewish role towards society, he's been one of my faithful watchers and supporters. and he's asking, what do you think about white ethno-states? Do white people have the right to have their own societies and not want non-whites in it?
Well, yeah, everybody has a right to be segregationists. How they interact with the greater world is totally a cultural precept. I personally don't advocate it, but that's something that you can't stop. If you're not wanted, then find somewhere else that you are wanted. And that's just a hard reality. Like that happens every day in the economic system. Like classism dictates that if you can't buy into a neighborhood at a certain median that has a certain median income, or say for instance, a couple $100,000, then you're not allowed in that neighborhood. So that's just the same thing in a more subtle form. And that's, to me, that's really basic.
So when it comes to 2020 elections and saying, okay, we both have conservative leanings, and within the Republican Party, there's a rising element of nativism, possibly white nationalism, and say, I'm very comfortable in multicultural places. If there is a red-blue divide, I'm going to be on the blue side of the divide because because I'm Jewish, because I'm a multiculturalist. But I would coalition together, the question like Israel and teaming up with different European politicians, or even on the Republican side, when it comes down, you say, oh, who's supporting Trump, who's supporting the Republicans, and these people are segregationists. How do you come to forming the greater coalition? And do you see, like in Michigan, where we've talked about it many times, Michigan is largely geographically, it's about 70% population white, and of the non-whites, probably 90% of us live in Metro Detroit, and so if we're voting Republican, we're co-aligning with the larger people that might have a different vision of what it means to be Republican.
Well, yeah, politics, like all things, people choose their side according to their self-interest. And let me give you a little tidbit about Detroit, one of the gems and little known facts. Detroit, Michigan itself has more African-American multimillionaires than any other place in the world, because a lot of people don't understand the whole publishing industry from records is how a lot of these kids is riding around in these fancy cars. People think it's drug money, but in reality, it isn't. It's a lot of money being distributed through trade in performance organizations like ASCAP and BMI. But like, you have to look beyond the surface to see what's really going on. And by and large, Detroit is definitely on the comeback, because like a lot of the trouble is getting outpriced. But see, I want to jump back for a minute to answer that question about slavery that the person posted. Like,
was it Rothschild involved in slavery, or the Brazil connection?
Well, no, the Rothschild one, because see,
we have mutual friends here that are related to the Rothschilds, and even distantly, I always joke that like Rothschild begs me money, because these days, from my understanding, the majority of there's quite a few Rothschild descendants that don't have any money, and even the wealthy Rothschilds that are around today, relatively the new wealth is richer. So I know people that believe in conspiracy theory, in my estimation, overestimate the wealth of the Rothschilds, but I say we both have mutual friends here that are Rothschilds.
And yeah, as far as the slavery issue, the first introduction of slavery was introduced by Africans. Like, it was tribal conflict. And if you ever in Detroit, visit the Charles Wright African American Museum, and they have a whole illustration of how the trade unfolded and who benefited from it. And you had different agents in Africa that was cooperating with outside forces that was direct beneficiaries of it. So basically, yeah, it's enough blame to go around for everybody, but you just can't point your finger in one direction and say it was them over there, because in reality, it was all of us.
I mean, Jules Siddons, there's more African American, or there's more people of African descent that are millionaires in America than in Africa. And I don't know if that's statistic. Maybe certainly.
No, that's statistically
this neighborhood
true.
Here I'm in here is majority African American, and it's upper middle class. Homes cost over $200,000, and I don't think there's places in Africa that have just miles and miles of single family housing with running water, electricity, high speed internet, paved roads. And so certainly, just like the Jewish diaspora is more successful than the people in Israel, and the Indian diaspora is very wealthy. Also, the African American diaspora relatively is more successful than in Africa. I mean, what do you feel about um, we're both heavily involved in Israel, and building up Israel, and the concept, maybe from a biblical belief or a believer's perspective. But what are your feelings on you're building up Africa? Are you saying your lot is here in America and that's not your concern?
No.
Or would you use some of your, does it interest you to, heavily be involved in the organization and politics of Africa?
Same thing. Yeah. Like I'm already involved in Africa because one of my secrets is that I invest in water development in Africa, like freshwater development in the form of wells and sanitation. So that's just my pet project, But yeah, as the world economy gravitates, it's going to go back to Africa, and the pioneers are already starting to go there to try to develop infrastructure. So yeah, definitely.
I don't know if Dim Mak was the Islamic one, but he's asking your views on interracial marriage, or the new large element of people coming, like, I'm a half-blood Jew, but there's people from interracial marriages. There's vast numbers. It's everything increasing, and in a place like Detroit, where currently it's largely, like, I think it's still almost 90% African American.
Well, let me share this
you have
with
the
you.
rising demographic of interracial people.
Well, you have always had a demographic of interracial people because it started with original tribal integration. So therefore, like when I applied for a job, like they did a neural psychological test, and I've never been asked this question before, but it was true. Like they dug into my background and they asked me, am I black or am I Arab? And so definitely I do have Arab blood in me. And it was
Have you done a 23andMe?
No, I found out through another source, through my gene mapping. But it was kind of funny to see that they obtained a job that I applied for, obtained my medical records. So long story made short, like interracialism doesn't bother me because in every society that has ever existed in the world, and this includes European societies, everybody has always mixed race, whether you be Serbian and Romanian or Yugoslavian and Lebanese or African and Chinese. It just really doesn't matter as far as the ruling classes. Like these issues of purity, alleged racial purity, are all like lower class issues of people who really don't know. Like this is another piece of propaganda that keeps people divided and will keep you poor. But the ruling class is a joke. The aristocracy is all tied together in bed, which is true because, look at the current like royal houses right now, like the current queen or princess, one of the royals, English royalty is from Black German extraction. Is that Prince William's wife, one of them?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
big
so
in the news.
yeah, that's not even a big deal. That's been going on forever. You know what I'm saying?
So we've been at it an hour. Like, I think I've relatively successfully introduced you to my audience, and like I get a lot of trolls, so to say, or different comments, so it's hard to separate the questions. Or people are asking things related to different things. We could keep on going. If you want to move into talking Jewish politics, I'm happy to keep this going. Or I'm even happy to attempt dropping the link into the chat, although it might be a little risky. I might get trolling that would cause me to have to take the stream down. So I'm not sure I want to risk that. But do you want to move in? Is there anything else you want to add, or do you want to move into talking Jewish politics, or do you want to just call it a good stream?
Well, yeah, I'm very fortunate and appreciative of your audience listening. And I would like to just call it a stream because, like, technically, I don't know enough about Jewish or Israeli politics to even make a correct assessment about how the system works. You can definitely elaborate more on that because you actually live there and spent time there. And I haven't, so I don't think it would be fair for me to even make a correct assessment about something.
Would you want to answer? Josh is asking, like, are you a Jew?
Um, it doesn't matter what I am. I'm a human being first. Like,
Well, I mean, I agree with you, but I'd say, like, I'm a Jew. I'm not scared to admit it. Like, there's a reason I'm walking around with these things. But I mean, you don't have to
right.
address the question, but we could. Okay, so unless there's any final questions, doing at Doooovid, or else we're gonna call it a day. Like, hopefully we're going to do regular ones of these streams. We might try to do one more geared for a Detroit audience. I got more national audience and kind of like an alt-right audience due to largely me participating in blood sports and debates. And it's very possible Deshaun at some point will gather in and participate in
let me make one last comment.
Some of these larger debates.
For the person that asked them I'm a Jew, read your Bible and look up my name. Because if you really knew how to speak Hebrew, you would know that question. Like, that's a nonsensical question as far as I'm concerned.
He plays chess a little bit. I mean, unfortunately, his chess game is not that great. Like, my mother is a lawyer for the Detroit Institute of Arts. People see my YouTube. I'm constantly, every Friday, I'm a volunteer chess coach there. And he'll come and play some of the kids from the Detroit program. And actually, they usually beat him. I mean, he's got a decent chess game, but he's never had any professional training. And so that's part of the fun of the program,
right,
is that people who go through the training would be able to largely, beat. So he's a good sport. He comes down to the club and will play kids from the program. And I think he probably loses more than he wins, but I think that's a sign of the, goodness of the program, and just that he enjoys a good game of chess every once in a while, but
yes,
he's never actually read a chess book or went through strategic training and how to play good openings or something like that.
Well, yeah, like, life is full of learning experiences, and definitely.
You want to comment on what you think of the soul? I gave my defense, heavily about, the different Jewish and Kabbalistic text of what's your conception of the soul? Or, I mean, are you kind of like a dualist where you think we have a separate soul that resides in the spiritual realm that imbibes the body? Or are you kind of like a monist where you think the soul is part of rises from the material? And once you answer that, do you think that the soul, everyone basically has the same soul, or do different people, like different races and nations, or Jews and Gentiles or religions, have different souls? You think just that everybody has basically the same soul?
Oh, that's a great question. I would have to go on the path of, I think the soul rises from the material, because it's like, once the body was fashioned at whatever point in the cosmic realm, then definitely the soul was put in there by whatever force that put the soul in the body. Like, it's hard to be descriptive in a sense. Like, it's a lot of symbolic names that we can associate, like God, for better words. But in reality, I've thought about that, and in nature itself is just too vast to even begin to even conceive like that question. Like, I will have to go along with the popular text just to get an ideal of the concept. Like, I'm kind of like borderlining the dualism too, because it sounds very practical to me.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of research into it, and just my audience gets a feel for Deshaun's worldview. I mean, he is a spiritualist and believes in God and prayer, but it's a difficult concept to think about. What's the nature of the soul? Are all souls equal? Did you want to comment an opinion on Black Israelites? Or you want to pass on that?
Yeah, I would count. I think that it's sad in the sense that I've seen those people out in public, and they don't do any justice to people like Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen, who was the premier Black Jewish scholar in the world. Like, I kind of feel disheartened that people would jump out there without having proper knowledge, and that's just my personal opinion and taste. But I'm just saying, like, from a man that knows the hieroglyphic language and knows the time periods and the other cultural markers, it seems to be kind of an embarrassment as far as I'm concerned.
Just for the value, because I have my regular viewers. Some of these people have been watching me for over a year, and know quite a bit about me, so people get a part of your worldview. And if we do a weekly show, people will know these, and they'll be able to fill in other people in the chat who are like, who is this guy, what does he think, so you don't have to answer the same questions again. What about your view of biblical creationism? Do you accept the Orthodox account that the world is 5,779 years old, or you more think like evolution and the world's millions of years old, or do you kind of have like, you could think about it from either way? You don't want to be pushed into answering one way or the other.
Well, I can answer that question. Like, to tell you the truth, for my own selfish account, like, I feel very comfortable in leaning on the biblical text, like the Bible and other biblical sources. So yeah, like, it's therapeutic, but in my logical research mode of mine, I might come to different conclusions based on the evidence that I see. But I'm like a lot of other people, like, I like my creature comforts, and the Bible or the Torah or the Quran or any other book of inspiration and historical facts, I can lean on very easily.
Okay, I appreciate you coming. I'll even shake your hand. Usually I'm not a great handshaker. In synagogues a lot or different places, people shake hands constantly, like I like Hindus or whatever. But I'm happy that Dishan joined us. Hopefully he's going to be a regular, and he's got his own streaming. Like, he's on the radio here in Detroit, but that's more local stuff. And if there's a proper venue on my channel, or if he's got his YouTube channel up and running, I'm more a computer tech guy. He's okay with computers, but I'm probably going to be the one who is going to walk him through how to go about the computer part of him. He's a sound guy. He could probably figure out like the microphones and camera stuff just as well as me, but actually the streaming. So I'm glad to introduce him to my audience, and hopefully we'll be doing this regularly. Hopefully he's going to get his own channel up, and there'll be different venues to talk about a whole series of issues. And we want to bring in different people, possibly locals, of all different sorts of things that are concerned to the community or politics, and maybe street interviews at the Democratic primaries. Is there any final words you want? We got 35 people watching, and people might tune in later. If there's any final words you want to say.
Well, I would like to say to everybody who agreed as well as disagreed, just keep coming, keep your minds open, and don't ever be afraid to learn and readjust, so that's all I got to say.
Okay, thanks for tuning in. And Dishan has YouTube and Twitter and different social media, so if he wants, I'll put that in the description later, whatever he wants to promote. And hopefully we're going to be able to do this weekly. And so we'll see if next week we have another topic. If people could leave comments in the video, and he'll have access to he's got his own YouTube account and social media. So if you make comments on this video to Dishan, he should be able to answer it, or I'll forward them to him. And if there's interest in different topics, maybe we could have a special stream about Dr. Ben and Pan-Africanism.
Yeah, that'll be a good topic.
The first one we wanted to talk about the rise of Black Conservatism in Detroit, which is going to be applicable to these elections and to a greater public, and the Pan-Africanism in nativism, different spiritual movements, is probably more niche talk that may not be interesting to the wider audience. But for those interested, hopefully we'll do that maybe even next week. So I'm going to sign off. Have a great night, everybody. Thanks for joining in.